Okay, good morning, everybody. I think I'm getting stuff set up. We still have a few minutes, but as I'm waiting for everybody to join, if there's any questions before we get going, please uh, unmute yourself and try to. Okay, looks like uh, it's 9:30. Got quite a few people logged in here. Um, so as I getting ready to share the PowerPoint here in just a second, are there any questions? I hope everybody's had a chance to access the OpenStax, find the textbook. Are there any questions about that? All right. Looking at my chat as well, just to make sure. I am yesterday, or not yesterday, Tuesday, as I went through all of this stuff, I had a message asking if I had recorded, and I completely forgot to do that. I had meant to, but I've got it recording right now. So this lecture will be posted on the Moodle. I'll post the link shortly after. Okay, so if there are no questions, let me find this PowerPoint and I will get going with that. So on Tuesday, I keep wanting to say yesterday. We started talking about biology. We started thinking a little bit about what biology is in the first place, and we had a couple of examples. I don't know if anybody was thinking about this toad or a toad, but biology is the study of life. And as we think about life, let me back it up to the previous slide. There are numerous things that we try to utilize to classify or characterize what constitutes a living organism. And some things we will recognize fit, and other things we may have some issues with. And we talked a little bit about viruses and do they fit all of these specifics. And well, the answer is not all of them. So as we start going through here, we want to start thinking about some of these characteristics. And I've got a handful of images that will try to shed some light on this and put some stuff into perspective. And I'm sure as we're moving through here, that you can start thinking about other things that also fit these categories as we're trying to evaluate this. Maybe thinking about a virus and, does it have all of these potentials or not? So back to the toad, let me make this a full presentation. I think, I don't know what that, I don't remember what that does with my, okay, it doesn't do anything with my screen. Okay, and the way my view is, I'm only seeing just a couple windows. So if you do have a question, unmute yourself and feel free to unmute and interrupt me, because if you're trying to raise your hand or anything like that, I don't think it's going to pop up on my window. That's okay. So we left off Tuesday right at this point, as we were starting to give kind of this representation of what is life. So our initial image here is of a toad, and its living organisms are highly organized, ordered systems. And with that, we will start thinking about how do we keep all of this order. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to keep things in order. And that we will see here in a little bit. Utilizing energy and metabolizing is a feature that feeds into this. We need that in order for growth, for regulation, but in order to keep things in their positions and in their places, and to ensure that all of the cells and tissues are functioning properly, we need to think about that as well. And so lots, as we move through here, we'll talk about separately, but you have to realize there's interconnected pieces of the overall puzzle that makes the individual, or as we showed last time with the picture of the Earth, the biosphere. It's more than just the planet. We need to think about the atmosphere as well. The whole ecosystem is a potential as we think of order as well. So as we look at the structures with this, we can see organization from individual cells, collections of these cells into tissues that have a specific type of function that's gathered together to form organs, and those organs into organ systems. This is definitely an aspect of biology where we can think about going through these details, but that's not the focus of this course. We're not going to go through details and talk about different types of anatomy of organisms. We're not thinking about getting numerous animals in here and dissecting and doing things like that. That's not the focus of this biology course. So if that's what you were hoping for, there are other courses that are more along the majors biology route that will give you an opportunity to deal with some of that stuff. But definitely not something that happens in here. And maybe that's something that also people aren't maybe as excited about when it comes to biology. They're like, oh, I don't want to dissect a pig. Don't worry, you're not doing that in here. We're not going to go through and expect all of the details of different tissues and organs. Okay. Maybe that's what you want. The ability to respond to stimuli. There are all sorts of examples to when we think about this. And this plant right here is really pretty impressive. I will see. I'm not 100% if it's able to be moved. But in the greenhouse in the biology department, there are some of these plants that it's really pretty impressive. You can just brushing against the leaves or touching them, they immediately just close up and they stay that way, as it says here, for a few minutes, and then they open back up. It's a response to the stimuli, maybe a protective mechanism that hopefully maybe, prevents the leaves from being chomped down by some herbivore. I don't know. It is pretty interesting, and it makes it look, like it. Well, I mean, it is alive, but it looks like it. As soon as you touch it, you see it retract, and it's definitely impressive. So I'm looking at a chat here. Tree removal and trimming. How much surrounding areas lead the way to and shape of trees and shrubs? Yeah, I think it's just crazy as you think about some of this, and we have a handful of trees planted in our yard, and it's definitely like that, where some of them have grown very quickly and the others are just kind of struggling. Yeah, so growing and moving to chase the sunlight for sure. And that's definitely a response to stimuli. A good example of some of that, and you've probably noticed some of these things, sunflowers, as their name implies, you can see a sunflower turning to kind of follow the sun as it's as well as the earth's spinning, but as it looks like the sun is moving across the sky, those sunflowers will turn. There are definitely potentials like on the interstate in between Pocatello and Idaho Falls. Oftentimes in the median, there's lots of sunflowers growing, and you can see them facing the east if you're heading to Idaho Falls in the morning. And as you're coming back to Pocatello in the afternoon or evening, they've all turned and are facing west. It's definitely impressive to see that. So these are really pretty cool, and maybe we'll see if we can get some and take a peek at them. Is the plant's name the official name for sleeping grass, or are the two different? That is, oops, I clicked on the wrong, I don't know what I'm doing here, guys. Sorry. Let me back that up. I don't know the answer to that. I am uncertain. I guess, have you Googled this up to see what it says? What's Wikipedia say? I don't know the answer to that, but it's impressive. I think that seems to fit. And maybe I'm more, when it comes to plants, sleeping grass, I would rather know that rather than the scientific name, and that's probably maybe not so good. I don't know. Okay, enough of that. You've heard the saying, cuter than a box of kittens. So we can see with reproduction, there's inherited genes from both parents with shared characteristics. And you can see variation. You can tell they're all kittens, right? But there's definitely some variation as we look at these. And with that, it's all the result of genetics and the respective traits that the parents have the opportunity to contribute half of those, each parent contributing half, to create an individual that's got the full complement. And we'll go through some details with that a little bit later. I like this image as we see the variation with these cats. And you can see here some kind of calico cats, some orange, there's some black in there. There's kind of a smattering. We've got an orange, we've got a black one, and we could potentially envision that maybe the mom was a black cat and the dad was an orange cat. And here we have black ones and orange ones, and then kind of a mixture of the two, the calico. I will give you a quick a quick story about this. I think it's really pretty interesting. Maybe you've heard about this. Calicos, when we see this coat coloration in a mixture of the two, if you will, the respective parents, you get this type of coat pattern. And it is a result of the two different types of cats generating this. When this occurs, virtually always these calico cats are female. And that has to do with the way that the coat color is laid down. And the coat coloration is carried on X chromosome. So females 2X and males an X and a Y. And so with that, the potential to see some of this randomness, this patchwork, if you will, in the calico cat is a result of having 2X chromosomes, a female cat. Almost always. Do you guys have you heard of this, what I'm talking about with the calicos?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a quick story because there are some potentials where maybe you don't get a female, right? We were visiting one of my wife's relatives. This cat walks into the room. It's a calico cat, a pretty big one. He was super friendly. Walked up to me. I was petting it. And I'm like, oh, she's such a pretty cat. And they were like, oh, no, that's a boy. And I was like, what? Well, that's odd. And as we continued to talk a little bit about this stuff, I was like, holy cow, I need to talk about this for a minute. I think this is just crazy. This cat is super rare. It's, technically he's kind of a genetic anomaly, and really definitely is a rare situation. For a male calico cat to be born, in order for that to happen, it is male, it's got to have a Y chromosome. But in order for the coat color to be expressed like we're seeing, it's also got to have 2X chromosomes. So now we've got a genetic anomaly, an individual that is male but has an extra chromosome. We call that a trisomy. We'll discuss some of this later on, definitely. But it's an additional chromosome. And oftentimes that's bad news. We can see.
I have something to say about that.
Oh, yeah. Pipe up. Let's hear it.
Okay, so my son actually has XXY syndrome. So he has trisomy 21, but he also has that third sex chromosome.
Okay.
XYY, I mean. He has the two male chromosomes.
Okay.
So this is kind of the really similar, but different. But I understand like this whole like kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So XYY, he's got a double Y. That is very interesting. And so, do you know what that disorder is called off the top of your head? I'm sure you do.
They just referred to it as XYY syndrome.
Okay.
They didn't have like a technical name for it, but
Okay.
I guess it's actually pretty common in males, about 1 in 100, but it doesn't have any real side effects. So you don't know if you have it unless you get a genetics test.
Right.
But apparently being taller as a man or maybe more aggressive, but that's not been proven true or false.
Right. Well, and I'm assuming he's pretty young yet. Is that true?
Yeah, he's 8 years old. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, very interesting. So what you're telling me, it's the littlest bit different than what I'm talking about, because you're saying XYY, and this one I'm saying XXY, which we call that Klinefelter syndrome. And it's also, it's a pretty common occurrence, and you may not even know that's, if it's worth talking humans, you may not even recognize that has occurred. You don't look like a calico. It doesn't happen that way. So like the XYY, where you may potentially see taller individual, maybe a little more aggressive. This might be a little bit different with the double X in there, where there's maybe some differences that might pop up later in life. We'll touch on some of that stuff a little bit later. So you said a trisomy at 21. So your child has Down syndrome?
Yeah, he has Down syndrome and the
XYY. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so Down syndrome is definitely it's a genetic anomaly where you get an extra chromosome, and with that, obvious features, characteristics, as that you see. So that, I assume, is why you had some genetic screening, and that's when you figured out the XYY as well.
Yep, correct.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks for piping up with that. I think that stuff is really fascinating. And as I was talking with the owners of the cat, I was like, this, to have this, it does, it's something it's random. It is a genetic anomaly, and it's pretty impressive. I'm like, wow, this cat's probably worth a bit of money. And technically they're, really probably not. And they're like, oh, well, he's fixed anyway. So I was like, well, then it's a done deal. Doesn't matter. He couldn't make more little male calicos. So interesting though. Definitely.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks. And as he's saying, with the XYY, it's definitely pretty common. And you may not even recognize that stuff. And there are others. And we're going to hit this in a few chapters down the road. But there are definitely others where you have, multiple X's being a female, triple X. We call those metafemale. An X and nothing. That's called Turner syndrome. Also female. And there are definitely a few issues in those circumstances with only one chromosome. All right. Interesting. Okay. So we will also think a little bit about reproduction as we discuss some more stuff, because it really kind of depends on what you're talking about. There are bacteria that are very different with how they go about their mechanisms of reproduction. They reproduce by what we call binary fission. They're asexual, so one cell replicates its material and divides and creates two new cells that are genetically identical, basically like clones of one another. And they can replicate. Typically, bacteria replicate very rapidly, and in a matter of minutes, 20 minutes or so, they could replicate. And so, in the course of a day, their population can become huge. When we think about stuff like mammals, when we think about animals like these little kittens here, their reproduction is sexual reproduction, where it takes a male and a female to generate viable offspring, and the recombination of these genes through sexual reproduction gives you variation. Asexual reproduction, like I said, they're basically like clones. You don't see variation, not through just simple replication, right? Bacteria definitely have capabilities of getting variation within their genes, but it's not just through simple reproduction that occurs. That's crazy stuff. All right, we'll talk more about some of that a little bit later. So adaptation is another big potential when we think about living organisms. They've got the ability to adapt to their given surroundings, their environment. And you hope that potential is there. And that's something, we're concerned about with climate change, is the fact that the change is happening at such a rapid rate that can adaptation keep up with it? Can things adapt to this changing environment when it's changing so quickly? And we will see. Some things have capabilities of adapting really pretty rapidly, and so their likelihood of success is definitely there. Others, maybe not, and that begs the question as far as, will we see an increase in extinction rates? And I think the answer to that is we're witnessing that right now. So polar bears and other mammals that live in cold, frigid regions can maintain their body temperature by generating heat, reducing heat loss through thick fur and super thick, dense layers of fat under their skin. Helps to ensure that they're insulated, that they're protected. You can see, a seal laying on an iceberg. It doesn't even realize that it's laying on an iceberg. It doesn't feel the cold, and it does that because of the thick skin and fur and fat layers that you see on these guys. Seals don't have a lot of fur. Yeah, they do. They do. I'm confused. Now I'm thinking seals and walrus. The walrus isn't super hairy, but seals are definitely hairy. Okay. So the ability to adapt. There's also, as we look at these polar bear, it looks like, nice white fur. The hair follicles are actually like see-through so that the sun can come through the hair and warm them as well. I'm like, I went back, but I didn't. It's a different topic. Same picture that we saw before, but different. So growth and development with this, although they don't look alike, even, our little calicos, you want them to. It's the way that these genes are inherited. It's the combination that dictates some of these respective characteristics that we're seeing in this tub of kittens. It's not a box. So it is impressive to think about, the growth and development and, the respective genes. There are numerous things that we can think about that are the result of maybe a single gene that dictates something. And there are other things that are very complex, and it's not the result of just one gene, like being tall or short. It's not one gene that says, you're going to be a basketball star or not. It's multiple things, right? So it really kind of just depends on those genes that you have been inherited. I remember a biology professor that I had many years ago that one of his favorite things was saying, you can't pick your parents. You can't pick those genes that you were dealt. And I think that's true. But I'm also intrigued because I feel like we're kind of on the cusp of being able to do that with the techniques, the genetic engineering and CRISPR technologies that allow for modifications to occur. The prospects of things like designer babies that seem, like science fiction, really maybe aren't, and that's disturbing and also kind of impressive at the same time. It's hard to say. If you had the capabilities of picking and choosing specific genes, could you, would you, should you do something like that? It's hard to say. We're in the midst of this genetic engineering where most stuff at the supermarket has been manipulated and modified. It's very interesting. So we'll talk more about some of that stuff a little bit later. I do think we could have some discussions about some of that and dive a little deeper. But right now, as we're introducing some of this, I want to just keep progressing. So regulation, I mentioned bacteria a minute ago, and here's an image of some bacteria. E. coli, you've probably heard of. You probably didn't know his name is Escherichia coli. That's really E. coli. Everybody knows E. coli, but they probably don't know Escherichia. So this is a bunch of E. coli kind of stacked up. It's an image taken through an electron microscope, so it's allowing us to zoom in super close. When we look at bacteria in the laboratory with a regular microscope, they look kind of just like little dots. They're not super impressive. Although, you know, looking at this, maybe this isn't very impressive either. I look at it and think, holy cow, that's awesome. It's beautiful. But that's because I'm a microbiologist and I think this stuff's pretty stinking cool. So when it comes to looking at some of this stuff, I said we're not going to go into details and talk about all of the different types of cells and tissues and so on and so forth. We're not going to deal with that, but we are going to talk about some details, and we're going to compare and contrast bacteria versus animal cells, or what we call eukaryotic cells. We'll look at some of the features that these cells possess or don't possess when it comes to the bacteria. And it's truly impressive because, although these cells are much smaller than our own human cells, they still are doing similar functions. They're pulling in nutrients, they're metabolizing, they're replicating. Our own cells are doing similar things as well. So even though they're very different, the mechanisms that they employ, the complexity that they share with other higher cells, if you will, is really, to me, pretty mind-boggling. So we'll see some more details with this as we open them up, peeling back their shells and seeing what really makes them work a little bit later. So E. coli is a common resident or inhabitant of our digestive tract. You want it in your body, in the GI tract. You don't want it on your salad or something you're going to consume, because that sets the stage for some serious illness. So depends on the circumstances, all right? And we can touch on some of that stuff a little bit later too. So the homeostasis, more back to the same polar bear. Homeostasis is basically keeping a constant environment, a constant internal environment. So with us, and I can't tell you a polar bear, I don't know what temperature it wants to be, but people, we want our bodies to maintain at a constant 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, or, since we are in a science class, 37 degrees Celsius. That's a constant temperature that we want to maintain. It doesn't matter if we are on an iceberg, like the polar bear potentially is. He looks like he's probably in a zoo. I don't think that's ice. So whether it's cold outside, whether it's summertime, it's 100 degrees outside, our bodies want to maintain this constant environment, and that takes energy in order to maintain homeostasis, to keep our temperatures right within that range, right? There are, we can back it up to our little friend E. coli. there are definitely some potentials with this. If we start thinking about disease, if we start thinking about infection, oftentimes when we get a disease, when we get a type of infection, not just a disease, but a type of infection, so a bacterial infection, one of the first indicators of this might be a fever. It might be some elevated temperature. And it really it's going to depend on your circumstances. But oftentimes having a little bit of fever is technically a good thing. It's your body's mechanism to try to fight off those foreign invaders. And so the homeostasis, this internal environment, it's like your body's thermostat. All of a sudden it gets hijacked a little bit, and our response says, we need to warm up a little bit in here. We need to make it inhospitable. If the temperature's too hot, these bad bacteria aren't going to like it, and we will try to drive them away. That's kind of what a fever is trying to do as a response to some of these foreign invaders. Sometimes it's effective. There are definitely a fine line that some bacteria have that allow them to tolerate temperatures. And if it goes up a little bit too much or down a little too much, that bacteria is not very happy. So sometimes, like with little kids, a little bit of a fever isn't that, you're concerned about it, but it may not be that big of a deal because their bodies are working really hard trying to fight this stuff off. And I feel like it's probably better to let that happen naturally. Treating with some fever reducers sometimes is warranted, especially if their fever is getting pretty high. If they're getting crabby, give them some Tylenol. But if they're not really exhibiting any issues, if they're not complaining about it, it's probably better to just let the temperature try to warm up enough to fight those invaders. So homeostasis is our body's ability to ensure we stay stabilized, but we also can manipulate that a little bit and try to use it to our advantages. And the whole idea with infectious disease and our immunology, where our body's trying to fight off specific things, ties into homeostasis and trying to maintain a constant surveillance and ensure that everything stays healthy. It's more than just your temperature that's important there. So it's constant environment, but really constant surveillance as well. And there's multiple cells and parts of your body that are participating in that to ensure our survival and success. And that's pretty crazy. So energy processing, this feeds back, and I kind of hit on that a little bit with the talking about homeostasis before we hit that slide just 1 second ago. It takes energy to keep things in this constant environment, to keep things stable. It takes energy. Technically, we would tend for chaos, but in order to prevent that, we need to process this energy. We need to have homeostasis, and it takes energy to keep it that way. So it depends on what you are, all right? As far as how you're dealing with or acquiring energy to begin with. Some organisms, like plants and other photosynthesizers, it's not just a plant, but plants can capture the energy from the sun. They harness that energy and they're able to utilize it and convert it into chemical energy, building like sugar molecules. And then plants will break it down. Other organisms that don't photosynthesize, like ourselves, we can take in those foodstuffs, eating those molecules, those chemical bonds within those molecules harbor a tremendous amount of energy, and we're able to tap into those energy reserves and utilize that for our metabolism, for our homeostasis. So, and this condor we can see tagged here, but we can see this condor as an example, pulling in its energy from dead stuff that it's feeding upon. So, and they are something that have made a tremendous rebound. They were on the brink of extinction, endangered, and are now moving back up. So definitely some promise. And I'm like, holy cow, these are some of the ugliest looking birds. Not that I want to judge them, but I just did. Okay, any questions as I'm rambling on here? Good spot to take a quick breather. Okay, so as we move on and start thinking about levels of organization, we want to think a little bit more, we're going to start talking, cells up to organisms and to the ecosystem as we progress through here. But we want to start off, and we will hit some of these in more detail a little bit later, all right? Living things, highly organized and structured. We've already hit on that. And here we can see an example of some of the order and structure with a fragment of the DNA molecule. There are numerous atoms here participating in the formation of this molecule. So we would start off with an atom, and those atoms interacting with other atoms to form molecules, and the potential for them to be humongous is definitely there as they start interacting. So it's all color coded with the types of specific atoms participating in this, and we're not going to get bogged down with any of that right now. Okay, so this puts that into a bit of perspective as we move through here, as I was saying, from an atom to the big picture, the biosphere, and everything in between. So that's really what we want to think about for biology as a whole, right? As I said, we're not going to spend a tremendous amount of time in these two windows thinking tissues and organ systems, but we do want to think about a little bit about atoms, because it's important to think how they interact and form bonds, because those bonds are able to provide energy to us or to whatever. So molecules, we'll go through and talk about different types of molecules that we think of as essential for life. Organelles, as we start describing cells like eukaryotic cells, we'll talk about these structures within cells that basically partition functions. And I said before, we'll talk about compare and contrast different types of cells, the bacterial cells versus cells like our own, and show features that set them apart. So again, we're going to kind of gloss over this, but from cells to tissues, and then a collection of these tissues to form organs, and then typically organs participating with multiple others to form an organ system. Like here we can see kind of lit up, and I can't recall, I should have scrolled through this morning before I restarted if we're going to blow up each of these. But here, this is a digestive system from the mouth to the anus, and some of the accessory organs like liver and pancreas, gallbladder, associating with that and aiding in digestion. So I told you we weren't going to focus on it, but here I am, we're rambling on about it. That brings us up to organisms. This is more the ecology bit as we get down to this last bit. So from organisms to populations and communities, the way they interact and participate and potentially impact one another, to the bigger picture, the ecosystem, And then as we zoom out to the biosphere as a whole, this is all within the realm of biology. So as we think about life, as we've discussed that the littlest bit as we started last time, thinking biology, there are all sorts of organisms. And oftentimes, as I was kind of getting at last time, when you think about what's alive, almost always you start thinking about some sort of animal, something that's, you know, hairy, maybe cute. I'm not pointing at a bat for saying cute, but maybe you think it's cute. Just depends, all right? So what we're looking at here is a little bit about the diversity of life. And there truly is tremendous diversity. We're going to go through and discuss some of this in some more detail later on, but this gives you a quick overview, a little bit of a perspective about some of this, and allows you to kind of see how we can get a better understanding. So again, I know we're going to talk some more about this later, but initially, when we think about trying to categorize stuff, it was really pretty simple. And you moved, maybe you were hairy, whatever. You see it moving around. Well, it's obviously alive and it's moving. It must be an animal. There you go. Then you look over at the tree and you see it and it's growing. You've witnessed that, you know that it's alive too, but it's not moving and it's green and it's full of leaves. Well, that must be a plant. Pretty stinking simple. You move, you're an animal. You don't move, you're a plant. That's how we start classifying stuff when we start grouping them all together. Now you got all this crap that moves. These are animals. All this crap that doesn't move. These are plants. And you're like, well, wait a minute. That's not very descriptive, right? We need a little bit more of, it's more than just an animal, right? Or a plant, and we don't have plants on here, all right? Or do we? There should be. Yeah, there's a plant. There's a tree right there. Okay. So I'm like, there's got to be. We've got eukaryotes up here. So eukaryotes, as we're going to start at the top and we'll work our way down and think about all of this diversity. And we're only seeing a small smattering. Eukaryotes are within the top of the list up here within a domain of life, and we'll get some more details about this, but eukaryotic organisms have membrane-bound organelles. They have a nucleus. That's a eukaryote. Their DNA, typically multiple chromosomes, and the chromosomes are linear, but really it's the nucleus and membrane-bound organelles that puts them within this category. There are a couple of other domains. Bacteria and archaea are what we call prokaryotes, two separate domains, and they are both bacteria-like, if you will. The archaea are very similar. However, with that said, the archaea have some similarities to the eukaryotes and hence separate domain. So 3 domains of life. We're only looking at one right here, the eukaryotes. And with that, within the domain eukarya, there is a plethora of stuff, like I said a second ago, that you probably think about when you think something that's alive, maybe ourselves. So the we bump it down. So from most inclusive to down at the bottom, most exclusive, down to the kingdom level. You've probably all heard of different kingdoms, kingdom animalia, all of the different animals. So at this point, the tree no longer in here, right? But everything else, we're keeping it. Oh, and paramecium's out too. These two we've cut off because paramecium is a type of protist. It's in its own kingdom. So these guys, two separate kingdoms that they will go to. Doesn't matter. Kingdom Animalia, and we can see we've removed those. Now we bump it down here to the phylum Chordata. So this is backbone or backbone-like structures, and we've removed a couple of others. Down to the class level, the mammals. So the class Mammalia. So it's numerous things that fit within mammals, having hair, lactating, so feeding their young milk, are key characteristics of mammals. And we've got rid of the fish and the snake. They have gone to their separate classes. From that, we'll move down to the order Carnivora. So carnivores. Now, as we get to the carnivores, we can see a handful here, and we've got rid of a few more out of this list. That we're trying to get down to your little friendly dog. So from carnivores down to the family level, the Canidae, so canines. We get to the Canidae, we see dogs, wolves, coyotes, and foxes. The lion and seal have been chopped off the list. Down to the genus level, Canis, there's dogs, wolves, and coyotes that fit within this genus. And then we can bring it down to the species level, and we can see Canis lupus, lupus for wolf. And as we see this, Canis lupus, the dog and the wolf both fit within this species. What the hell? So typically we say very, most exclusive. In order to further divide this, we get to, and we're not showing it, but we would get to a subspecies. So these two plus one more. Canis lupus familiaris is the dog, and Canis lupus lupus is the wolf, right? Further divided, all right? But at this species level, we are saying some stuff about these, all right? Within Canis lupus, dogs and wolves are basically within the same species. Do they look the same? Not really, although you may have a dog that looks pretty wolf-like, all right? There are definitely differences. However, a wolf and a dog, were they brought together, they potentially could reproduce, and they could produce viable offspring, right? Offspring that are able to reproduce and also produce offspring that could reproduce. That's what keeps them within the same species. Their appearances look different. They are different. Their habits are definitely different, all right? And we've divided them into subspecies, but they are not really that new evolutionarily. Their genetics are very similar, and their capability to reproduce is still there. They're still within the same species, right? The subspecies shows this variation is occurring. You can see all sorts of different breeds of dogs. And with that, they also have the potential to reproduce. Although I'm pretty sure you're not going to see a Chihuahua and a Greyhound reproducing. That's something you don't want to see. And once you've seen it, it can't be unseen. So not a good situation, right? So could that potentially mean we're going to see multiple speciations? Are we going to see variation and differences within this? I think that's probably highly likely. If you no longer have those capabilities of reproducing, differences will result, and we will see variation. We'll see a separate species. But at this point, they're not, all right? So this shows the diversity, a little bit of that, and how we try to go about categorizing it, separating it, and getting a name to a face, if you will. All right. So when we get down to the species level, you can see as we're moving through here, you get to the species level, and when we describe it, it's both words, the genus and the species name, Canis lupus, and they're written in italics. You capitalize the first and lowercase the second. Just as we showed with E. coli a minute ago, if you do some abbreviation, it's always the genus that gets abbreviated, never the species. You don't say Canis L, and you really don't really say C. lupus, but you could. E. coli, you've all heard of, but you wouldn't say Escherichia C. That's not the way that we go about it. So, okay, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense as we move through here and think about some of this. And you've probably all, had a biology class in high school or something like that, where you had to memorize all of these different things and the different types of kingdoms. We're going to go through and talk about some of this stuff in some more detail and talk about the different kingdoms. But it's not something that I want you to get overly concerned about. Just recognize that it's a mechanism that allows us to make these comparisons and get a firmer understanding. Definitely a lot easier than saying, oh, it moves, it's an animal. I would hope it's easier. So with those domains of life, we've got a couple of images here. The first, as we're seeing this, some bacteria. The second are archaea. We say here extremophiles. Oftentimes the archaea, which are bacteria-like, they are microscopic. They have shapes kind of like these bacteria. Here we're looking at, I don't know if it says in here, hot spring, but it doesn't say necessarily. Part of my stuff's blocked away. Could be, we could imagine this is Yellowstone with some of the hot springs and the activity within there. So extremophiles are types of organisms that live in environments that we might think of as pretty inhospitable, super hot, very salty, very cold, high pressures, things like that. And archaea seem to fit those roles where they live in habitats that are very odd. Before they were separated into their own domain, these were extreme bacteria, but they have recognized there are some genetic differences that really set them apart. The last two are within the domain Eukarya, but we've got kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia to show that. So 3 domains of life. We put a plant in there just for confusion. So I don't know why. So these guys, same domain, Eukarya. And that brings us to this image that shows more like the key, or the diversity of life, where we showed that with just some of the Eukarya. This is more of everything, right? With the bacteria, the archaea, and the Eukarya. And this basically like a family tree. Little star here, you are here. That's us, this little branch right up at the top. And if we were to look at all, if we were to dive into more of that, this branch itself, we would go back here, right? And this is where we start looking. And there's going to be a lot more than just these guys represented on this branch. But this is all part of that same branch. And here the star would be, that's us. Here we go. And as we keep going back, we can see there are fungi and plants, and then basically the rest, all right? These, so animals and fungi and plants, and then the rest are the protozoa. So there are all sorts of different types of protists, single-celled eukaryotic organisms, right? And there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of variation with these guys. They're still within the same kingdom. I don't want to geek out on this stuff right now, but you can see we've got a lot of different variation. And ultimately, these protists are going to get, in the very near future, will get separated into their own respective, likely their own respective kingdoms that we'll talk about their genetic variation in, you know, a little more order than just slapping them all together. And you can see they're more separated on this in the first place. So we go down this branch and we can see the archaea. The archaea, like I said, they bear some bacterial characteristics, and they also share some characteristics that are similar to the eukaryotes. That's why they're on this branch in between the two. We keep moving down and we see a separation point here, and the bacteria and the archaea. As we look at each of these, and as I'm moving my cursor over this bit, this little piece of the Y, if you will, this point that I'm marking right here, we call that a node. And you can see all sorts of nodes on these trees. And a node signifies a speciation event, a separation, a divergence point where these guys, just like I was talking about with the dogs and the wolves, or the Chihuahua and the Great Dane, can you reproduce? Can you exchange information? And if you lack that ability at that point, well, now you're different, you're distinct, you're a new separate species, or in this case, that's really what I'm getting at, separate type of species. And different domains where we see all of the variation, all of the plethora of different species of each of these grouped up onto this big tree of life. So the bacteria diverging over here, and we see all sorts of variation with these guys. And then as we move back down here, this darker line, this would move back towards this ancestral type of cell that gave rise to all of the others, a ancestral bacterial-like cell, not something that's actually bacteria, but similar. And as it acquires multiple variations and differences, we ultimately get to the point where we see a branching point, a separation between these big groups. This line, it looks nice and solid and a single line, but ultimately there were other little branches here and there that we're not seeing any of that stuff. It's not until we get up here, and there's also lots of little things that we're not seeing all of this as we're moving through. We're zooming in just to the, this is what's alive and present today, not all of the extinctions that we're not seeing visibly in current times. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, and we will go through some more tidbits of this in a, you know, in more general as we progress in the next handful of chapters, talking about some of the variation of life. So biology is the study of life, but biology itself has numerous disciplines kind of under this umbrella category, if you will. And so that opens up all sorts of complexities when we think about it. I will tell you, and this, you know, is a non-majors biology course. I'm not going to overwhelm you with all of these details, but when we think about biology, there are all sorts of subdisciplines. There are all sorts of players within this realm, and we try to introduce all of these topics within this course and say, oh, this is what an ecologist does. Here's what a microbiologist does. These things are separate entities. They're separate things in and of themselves. And trying to throw all of that at you in one course makes it sometimes very confusing and sometimes difficult. And I don't want it to be like that. All right. We want to introduce and show you that there's a lot of players here. All right. But I don't expect that you know what everybody's doing all of the time and all of the stuff they do. If you were truly interested in some of that stuff, maybe you're like, oh, anatomy. I think that stuff's really cool. Or as it says here, zoology. I want to look at all of the different variation of animals. That's what you would be focusing on. Microbiology is something that I find fascinating. And so I take more courses that are directly related to that. And those courses, all of a sudden, it becomes much more, well, simplified, if you will, because you're not focusing on everything under this umbrella. It's one small aspect of that. So biology as a whole can be difficult when you try to think about all of the subdisciplines, but when you partition them and start looking at it separately, that definitely makes it a little more simplified. So with that, even though we want to think of it simplified, a lot of these branches or subdisciplines are interrelated. They work together, they collaborate, they need one another in order to understand what's truly going on. Just as we kind of said as we started, biology does build on itself. So some of the topics we mentioned in the early lectures, when we get to ecology, we're still going to be talking about some of those same things, just as a bigger picture sort of an idea. So we could think about all of those things, all right? And as we start gaining a little bit of a maybe firmer understanding about biology, we can utilize that information and think about how it impacts us, how it affects our lives, and how we can maybe use that information to potentially make better decisions, to get a better picture about the world around us. That's what we hope for. So here we can see in this image some archaeologists. Paleontology is a branch of biology where we're looking at remains of things like fossils and helping to gain an understanding about living organisms today. A lot of what we know about we tap into from information from before. So the skeletons, the remains of these fossils, we can make comparisons to the skeletons of living organisms and see potentials for patterns of evolutionary history. Oftentimes, as we think about some of this, trying to search for some connection, some missing link, if you will, that will show a connection from this to that. And that seems to always kind of be a focus when we're trying to understand these pieces of the puzzle that go back for millennia. It's pretty impressive. So we can move to more of a invisible realm, if you will, and start thinking, as this image shows, with some forensic science, like CSI type of stuff. So where we're looking at, in this case, the extraction of DNA, maybe, as we see here, Army Criminal Investigation Lab, maybe some crime scene stuff. Who knows what we're really looking at here, but you can utilize information like DNA and get a tremendous amount of information about an individual. You can also get, potential evidence that shows the suspect was the actual culprit that committed that crime based off of that respective information. And there are truly some impressive things that we can witness with that. We'll hit a little about DNA technology And we'll definitely talk about DNA and the molecule itself as we progress along. So I'm not going to get bogged down with that right there. So we're, I think, about through with this. So the process of science, we think about shared characteristics within the natural sciences. Like I was saying, with all of the different facets under this umbrella, we potentially are tapping into multiple pieces of that to gain a better understanding. We'll move through and talk about a little bit about the process of inquiry. How do we think about things scientifically? How do we ask a question and actually know that what we're asking is accurate and that the results that we're getting are going to be something that's helpful? So we'll talk about inductive and deductive reasoning and make some comparisons about that and think about how we utilize that scientifically. So with that, let me back it out here real quick and just see where am I at on this schedule of stuff. Oh, I got a bit left. What do we've got about 5 minutes of lecture. I think I want to stop right with that and ask before if there's any questions. I'll leave you with this bit. We're about 10 slides left, 8 slides. But I think this is a good stopping point. So we stopped my share. Get back to this. Are there any questions or concerns?
Can you go back to that? My camera was, or my thing was glitching.
Back to the slide.
Yeah.
Okay. And the previous slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, you're good.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Other stuff?
Are we in person for next class?
Yes, we will be in person. We'll be in LC2, LC 1517 on Tuesday.
Are our Proctor free user accounts available?
What's that?
The Proctor free accounts? It says mine's not found whenever I click on it.
So the Proctor free stuff, you don't need to worry about any of that stuff until the test happens. So what will happen is you'll get on Moodle and you'll click on the exam, and then Proctor free will open up, and that's when all of that stuff will happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I've got I'm seeing a couple of things on the chat. Can I explain slide 17 again? Yes, I'll go back to that in 1 second. Textbooks on back order. How would you like me or anyone else to read the chapters? So Jamie, if you're still on there, you should be. I hope you're still on there. If you go to openstacks.org, the textbook is free online. It's an ebook. So you can access that through openstacks.org. Like I said, you can also go to Amazon. If you've got a Kindle or whatever, you can get it as an ebook that way as well. So if you're getting the paper copy, you can look at the ebook right now and you can definitely start reading. So let's see, back to slide 17. Let me go back to my share screen and I will see if I can answer that. Slide 17. Okay. So, and I don't know exactly let me see what my chat is saying. If it's in, okay. I'll answer your question about the labs here in just 1 second. This figure, this phylogenetic tree, it's like a family tree, if you will. It's a family tree of life. The three domains, the bacteria, the archaea, and the eukarya, are all big classification schemes, and they're color coded with that. The branching points show a speciation, a separation event where they have diverged and have went off on their own trajectories. There are multiple things not shown on these images. Only the tips of these branches are the living, present, or extant organisms. The stuff that's not shown are the extinct, the stuff that's not alive anymore. And so there were, we have come up on the shoulders of numerous organisms that have died and gone away before us before we get to this star up here. So there's a lot of detail and information in here. You don't need to get super bogged down. It is kind of just like looking at a family tree, showing this relatedness, but it is a very broad family tree where all of the animals are just one little teeny line here. As we look at evolutionary time frame, which is really kind of the distance on here, for us to get to this little bit up here, animals have not been around for very long. Bacteria and archaea, these suckers have been on the planet for billions of years, and were there for billions of years before any sorts of eukaryotes emerged and started their trajectory this way. All right. So hopefully that was good. If you've got some more questions, Liam, pipe up and let me know. Chandler, let's see, for lab, is there a dress code like closed-toed shoes? Yes, I believe there probably is a dress code for that. You should be wearing closed-toed shoes. If you know, I mean, you're not working with fire in the lab, but if you've got long hair, you should pull it back just to be safe. The lab manual posted on Moodle will have some information about policies like that. So that will give you some more detail. Okay, any other questions? You're welcome, Liam. I hope that answered what you needed. Okay, like I said, the lecture will be posted onto Moodle. I will get it uploaded here soon. So we will have that. Let's see what's Ashley saying. See you Tuesday. Have a nice day. Thanks, Ashley. Okay. I hope you all have a great weekend. And again, yeah, in person on Tuesday. Ready to go. I'm ready to see everybody for real. Thank you. Thanks, Jordan. Okay, and they're all dropping. I'm going to sign out right now. Have a great day, everybody.